Stefan Feld has truly entered the realm of troops on a map. It's called Chichen Itza, and while it is troops on a map, it would be doing it an injustice to just call it that only. Stefan Feld is bringing, of course, the same sorts of flavor that you expect from a lot of his games. There is a ton of scoring in this, and like I said, it's much more than just troops on a map. I have it set up here on the table. Today, I'm going to be giving you a bit of a preview, overview of the game, and highlighting a couple of the things that I want to point out specifically. If you're interested in gameplay, go check out Slickerdrips. He's put up a 2-player playthrough if you want to see everything kind of step by step. But as I said, I have it set up here on the table, and I'm going to give you a bit of a tour of everything that you see here and zero in on a few things that I think have that particular sort of Stefan Feld charm. The first thing and the main thing you're going to see is this map. This is a variable map set up of all of these hex tiles. It's very variable, incredibly random. You're going to set up Chichen Itza in the center, and it always has to be surrounded by some tiles, but then every other tile can be placed however you see fit. So this map can take on all sorts of shapes and sizes. Then you're actually going to put out, again randomly, creatures all over the map. You can see here we've surrounded Chichen Itza with these snake creatures. They recommend doing that because they're sort of the easier creature to defeat. But then you randomly place all the others out here and put some ruin tokens on some of the spaces that don't naturally have anything printed on them. Some of the other things that are going to be printed out there are villages, camps, ruins, temples, and you're going to want to interact and control a number of those things for a variety of different reasons, including some of those points that you're going to score at the end of the game. Over here, you're going to see a number of tiles that represent all of the creatures on the map. Each of these tiles is going to show the breakdown of all the different sides of the dice that are going to be rolled. And yes, you heard me right, dice will be rolled, although there is some mitigation. But also you're going to see on each of these tiles when that creature is going to participate in combat, because combat, which we'll get into in a second, is a very step-by-step layered approach to combat that feels more thoughtful than just simply dice chucking for sure. One of the 2 main boards out on the table is this one. It holds a bunch of different cards, some achievement tiles that you can get during the game, as well as a turn order track right there in the center. The cards across the bottom are God cards. They're going to be some endgame scoring cards, some ongoing effects, and some one-time effects. The deck of cards are magic cards. They come in 2 varieties. There's earth and fire. Those will be used during the first step of combat. Again, we'll get to that in a second. And then you're going to see some hero cards. The hero cards are represented by 3 pieces that each player is going to have on their player board. Once you acquire one of those hero cards, you're going to put the corresponding hero out onto the map with some of your troops. These come along with some special powers when they're in combat, when they're moving, all sorts of different elements of the game. And finally, there are 4 achievement tiles used in the game. Each of those come from 4 different stacks of tiles based on when they need to be triggered throughout the game. Once you do it, you can get it, but you have a limited amount of time based on the 6 rounds of the game in order to do some of those. And before I get to the second main board, I want to talk about the player board. The player board is going to hold some troops, those heroes that I'd mentioned, some action tokens, a couple tokens that represent whether or not you're at peace or ready for war, a little diagram for when you collect gems and you're able to fire off some bonuses, some scout tokens you're going to be able to put out on the map, and then finally the 4 gears or dials across the top of your board. These 4 things represent 4 different statistics that you're going to be able to improve throughout the game by using some of the actions on the action board in order to do all the things better, but mostly involved with the conflicts that are going to take place and the battles. And now, last but certainly not least, is the action selection board. This is where players are going to take those action tokens and select actions throughout the game. Each round, and there are 6 of those, is going to start with an income phase where you get some money based on how many troops you have out on the map. The more troops you have out on the map, the less income you're going to get because, of course, you need that income to fund all of those troops out there. You're also going to be able to do a few other things to help collect some of the things you might need during the round to do the things that you want to do. Then players are, like I said, going to take turns placing their action tokens on one of these actions. I have this set up for a 3-player game, so there are only 12 action tiles. You'll note along the outside edge there are costs for the actions. These are variable, and in fact they're variable every round of the game. You randomly place those out at this round. In the second round, those are going to have completely different positions. And this is probably the most interesting thing about the action selection mechanism. When you place on an action, before you take that action, you have to pay a cost. If I placed right here, if I'm the first one to place, I get to take the lesser of the two costs. And as you can see here, this costs either 2 or 7. If I'm first, I pay 2. Every other player that round, if they want to take that action, they can, but they have to pay 7 instead of 2. So you can see it almost gives a bit of a worker placement vibe. It is definitely action selection, but as you place things out here, you're not going to block anybody, but you're certainly going to make things much more expensive for other players. Of the actions out here, 4 of them are probably the most straightforward, are going to let you increase the value on your dials across the top of your board. There's 1 for each of the dials, and when you do that, you're not only going to increase it, but some of them come along with some immediate benefits. If you increase your melee combat from its first level to its second level, you're going to get a couple luck tokens. These are prototypes, by the way. They're clovers right now. They will be different in the final game. But those are going to be something that you can use throughout the game to potentially re-roll dice and do some other things. When you increase your shield die, you're not only increasing that level, but you're increasing the number of shields that you have. These can be used during combat to basically defend against losing a troop in combat. The ranged dial is not only for ranged combat, but it's also for movement in the game because you are obviously going to be moving your troops around this map. So the more you get that up, the further you're going to be able to go on any given movement during the game. And on the far left is the magic dial. This is related to those magic cards, and it's going to dictate during combat how many of either of the earth or fire cards you're able to play during that first phase of combat. Speaking of which, this action tile here is going to allow you to take more of those magic cards into your hand. You can take 3 when you take that action. There's another action that lets you take god cards. There's one that lets you move up the turn order track. There's one that lets you change from a peaceful state to a warlike state. This one here lets you interact with those hero cards where you can take one of those heroes and put the corresponding piece out on the map. Once you have a hero out on the map, it's going to have some powers innate in that card, but it's also going to allow you to use that same action to move a group of troops, an army, if you will, with a hero in it, in a special way as well. This tile lets you put more troops out. Whenever you put troops out, you have to put them either in Chichen Itza or on any other tile where you already have troops. And then this one also lets you kind of rearrange all your troops in the tiles or on the tiles that they're already located in any way you see fit, or put a scout out. When you put a scout out, you're able to take a peek at a ruin token that's on there. The ruin tokens are going to have some points on the bottom of them, but you're going to be able to effectively get a little information before you go in there to see whether or not it's worthwhile to try to take control of that tile. And finally, there are these 2 tiles. These are the 2 movement tiles. One is specifically for moving on to land, and the other one is for crossing water. So when you start one of those, your first step has to be on either water or land, and it has to stay on that type of tile for as long as you do that movement. If at any time you're moving and you move into a tile that either has an opponent's pieces or one of the creatures, you need to stop there and resolve a conflict. And that is also going to end your movement. So as spaces get cleared out, you'll be able to move a little bit further. But the name of the game is to try to clear some of these tiles and take control of them. And combat in this game is a bit more of a thoughtful process, like I said. If you've ever played the game Mage Knight, it's kind of like that in that it goes step by step with magic combat, ranged, and then to melee. And once you're in melee, you're going to kind of go 3 rounds to see whether or not you're successful in attacking or not, in which case you'll need to retreat. But the magic and the ranged are going to come into play because when you go in as the attacker, you're the only one who's going to use magic unless you're fighting a particular type of creature. And in ranged, it's going to be the same case for the creatures. If you're against an opponent, the opponent can't use the magic, but it can start jumping in during the ranged combat. It's a really interesting step-by-step because you can actually look at the creature and say, okay, I'm geared up for magic. I might be able to go in there and do enough damage during the magic part of combat so that I don't have to resolve as many steps of the melee combat as I might need to otherwise. And to use this right here as an example, if I'd moved in here, and I should note I have these all laying down, but they should be standees that are standing up because the bottoms of them have some values on them, which is effectively their health. But I'm going to initiate a conflict with this snake creature. When I do that, I'm going to go to the top of the order in the combat, which is magic. When I look at the snake tile, it doesn't participate in anything but melee. So I don't have to worry about it during magic or ranged. Now, it just depends on what I'm capable of doing during the magic and ranged combat. In this case, I'm at level 1, so I could play either 1 fire or 1 earth card. The way these work are kind of interesting. Either one, I'm going to play a card, it's going to let me roll a die. So later, if I'm able to play 2 cards, I could roll 2 die. And depending on whether I played an earth or fire cards, is going to dictate what I need to roll on those dice in order to succeed. The earth cards are much easier. You just have to roll between a 1 and 4 for it to be successful. The fire ones are 1 to 3, so it's still 50-50. But if you hit on a fire, you're allowed to roll again to see if you can get sort of a bonus hit, doing 2 damage to the creature's health. Now, I should note, if I'd been fighting one of these creatures, this one actually does participate in magic. So when it rolls its die, depending on whether or not it rolls one of those earth symbols, it's going to do damage back. Next, we would move on to the ranged combat. In the ranged combat, you're going to look at your ranged dial and see how many dice you get to roll. At the beginning, you're not rolling any range, so you definitely have to level that up. But once you do, you're going to roll that number of die, and for every 1 or 2, you're going to get a successful hit. And it should also be noted that if you have a scout in that same tile for some reason, you're actually going to be able to roll an extra die. Next, you go to melee, which effectively is where both parties are going to go 3 rounds of combat, or up to 3 rounds of combat, until the attacker either succeeds or doesn't succeed in eliminating either the creature or the opponent that's there. If they fail, they simply have to retreat to the tile that they came from. If they succeed, they've taken control of that tile, and a few things are going to happen. The main thing is that you're going to have control of that tile. In this case, I've taken control of a village tile. That village tile is going to give me some unique income at the beginning of every round, plus it's going to be worth some points at the end of the game if I still have control. But if I had gone in here instead and defeated this creature, I would get this ruin token. Now, it's going to stay out on the board, but I'm going to be able to take a look at it right now. It's worth 4 points at the end of the game. No one else needs to know that. The only other person that could know that is someone who's scouted this by putting a scout on this tile. But I know that I have, as long as I've controlled that tile, 4 points banked for the end of the game. And if it's not a village or a ruin, it might be a camp. The camps are going to give you a different income during income phase and some points at the end of the game. Or finally, a mine. There are 5 different mines: yellow, green, red, blue, and purple. When you take control of a mine, you take the corresponding gem. It's the only one of that color you will get, and you add it to your player board on that little diagram that I mentioned. Once you have at least 2 gems, you'll see that you're going to fire off some bonuses and get some bonuses throughout the game as you take control of mines. And as I said, everything revolves around this action selection board. Every round, once all players have taken 4 actions here, you're going to move on to the next round. Like I said, the game is played over 6 rounds, and at certain points, you're going to have achieved some of these achievements, or they'll go away and won't be able to be scored again. The end of the game, too, is going to have a ton of scoring. Players are going to get 2 points for every camp and village they control at the end of the game, 3 points for every temple, and variable points depending on whatever ruins they control. Additionally, you're going to get some points depending on how many troops you got on the map. I mentioned earlier that the player board holds these troops, but as you remove them row by row, you're going to actually flip these over. That has 2 effects. One, it's going to give you points at the end of the game. It's also going to reduce the amount of income you take at the beginning of every round. And the creatures you've defeated throughout the game are also going to give you victory points, which are also on the bottom of their standees. You'll get point for the idle tokens you've collected, which is another currency that you can use during income. You'll get points for however many gems that you've collected. The more you collect, the better it is. You'll get 3 points for each hero that you still have active out on the map, and of course the points that you're able to achieve throughout the game on those achievement tokens. But finally, I want to talk about one of the god cards, the endgame scoring ones, because there are a lot of them, and throughout the game you can collect these, and these are personal end-of-game scoring cards only for you. This can bring a significant amount of points if you go after them quite a bit. And they can range from anything from like scoring 2 victory points for each step on the turn order track to something like scoring victory points equal to the strength of your highest defeated creature plus 2 victory points. And it's due in part to that scoring, not just those cards, but all the scoring I just talked about, that really makes this feel like a Feld game and not just a standard troops on the map game. That and that thoughtful approach to combat, not to mention the very, very interesting approach to action selection. I can't overstate how interesting it is that those costs are changed each round. Not to mention, every game you're going to lay these action tiles out in a different order as well. So it's really going to feel unique and almost worker placement-esque when you're taking those actions, believe me. But that is Chichen Itza. If you have any questions at all about it, please make them in the comments below. I'm happy to get down there and try to answer whatever questions you have. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.